Hi there. You know that part right before you're about to present and the presenter before you is going and you're getting more and more anxious and you're like, gosh, I just can't wait to get on stage so I can try to relax and actually just deliver the presentation. That was just happening, so trying to calm down. I'm Greg Unrein. I head up product management for New Relic's APM and infrastructure products. I'm out of the Portland office, and with me is Alberto Gomez. He's a director of product management out of the Barcelona office focused on cloud integrations. And so today we're going to talk with you about monitoring dynamic infrastructures with New Relic. And it's pretty awesome to see the tee up for this in terms of the content that's come before it. A lot of what we'll talk about today sort of reinforces a lot of those points. But thank you very much for being here, and thanks for listening to us. So we're going to run through this. We've got some slides, some announcements, and then we're going to get into demos, which will take the lion's share of the presentation. So we've heard a lot about modern infrastructure today, and that it is very dynamic, right? Faze was just on stage talking about how disposable infrastructure has become, and how, if you think about it, that's really how you want it to be treated. You want to treat it as a virtual resource, but as you're doing that, there's lots and lots of complexity. It starts at the physical layer, right? There's still boxes that need to get racked and network cables that need to get hooked up, and that's the sort of base layer of infrastructure. And then layering on top of that, you've got the operating systems, you've got the hypervisors running VMs, you've got Docker and other systems, Kubernetes, Mesos, running containers, and those things are becoming very, very short-lived entities, right? We'll see more about that later today. You're running components on top of that, which are software that you don't care about the internals of it. You heard AJ talk about that earlier today. You don't care what the internals like. You just need to know that it's there and available, and that your individual teams are able to take advantage of that, so that your DevOps teams, they have sort of control of the full stack, and they're able to adapt the system that they need over time to the software they're trying to deliver. But all of that complication that comes from all those systems working together, it requires great visibility, and that visibility has to be adaptive to the change that's happening. So you've got change. The universe itself is, a very dynamic system. If you're building systems that aren't ready to handle change and react and respond to that change, then the system's probably not going to be very useful over time. You heard Chris from KPMG talk about that earlier today, how they went from these very long cycle times to much shorter cycle times as they adopted change in the way that their teams are working. So you want to be fostering that. Change in the way that the customers are engaging with your businesses and with your brands. And that can be everything from you release a new mobile app and it just takes off, which is a great outcome for everybody, but that can drive new load onto your infrastructure and onto your applications, and you want to be able to respond to that new demand, like we heard the story about Airbnb and their Super Bowl ad earlier. You've got changes in architecture as you're moving some of your existing workloads into the cloud, as you're developing new applications on top of the cloud. You want that, and then methodologies, the same thing. I think Faze was saying, culture change is the hardest part, getting people and systems, the processes that those people work in, to be adaptive. And you start, like KPMG did, by making that process iterative. You want to start small and then just sort of incrementally build on top of that and make yourselves more and more adaptive over time. And so that adaptation brings a lot of opportunity with it. The opportunities come in the form of resilience, in the form of adaptation to market needs, to the changing technology landscape, to efficiency. So you can start to take advantage of only running infrastructure that you need when you need it, as opposed to sort of having to provision for peak load and run that all of the time. So you get more efficiency in that way. But all of that change and all of those different systems that are interacting with each other, it's incredibly important that you're able to see what's going on. And it's not just visibility into each one of the individual components. You need visibility across the system in a way that allows you to see sort of what's happening across the system. The system effects start to dominate as you've got all those parts working together. And that's another sort of reason that you want to be adapting to that change. If you're changing all the time, then you get into being used to that change, and it becomes less risky. So that's basically the motivation that drove us to developing New Relic infrastructure, which we launched last November. And you saw the video before. We'll do a little bit of demo of it. But we recognize that as the world's changing, as New Relic developed its product portfolio out over time, we went from APM, server-side performance monitoring out into browser and mobile application monitoring, synthetic monitoring. And we thought the natural complement to that, to start to round out that full stack picture, was to layer in infrastructure. But we wanted to make sure we did it in a way that fit with cloud-oriented and cloud-native applications and systems. And so one of the key elements of that is understanding what the system's doing and what it's composed of at any given point in time. And so we've got real-time inventory and inventory management so that you can see this is what's deployed, these are the containers that are running, these are the configurations that those containers have. And because we're monitoring that in real time with a very fast cycle time, we can also show you when that stuff changes so that you can correlate that change with the sort of classic performance and load metrics that you have, whether that's CPU or application response time or error rate or whatnot. And when you can bring that picture together of those metrics you expect to be there from an infrastructure or an application performance monitoring perspective, and you see what's changed about your system around the same time, whether that's a deployment or containers spinning up or spinning down, that helps incredibly with getting to an understanding of what's gone wrong so that you can recover if you have a problem. And then as we thought about, okay, what's it going to be like to run this? What's it going to be like to price this? We wanted to make sure that the pricing for the infrastructure product was aligned to that same kind of flexibility, so that as you're able to do more fine-grained provisioning of your infrastructure and have those workloads being adaptive over time, you want what you're spending on the monitoring of that stuff to be adaptive in a lot of the same ways. So an example of that is, we have companies we work with that have television shows, and those television shows drive big peaks in traffic at very specific points in time every week. And so they're able to spin up their infrastructure in anticipation of that. If they have a particularly successful show, they can go over that. But they don't want to be paying for monitoring at that sort of peak level. With this kind of, the cloud pricing we offer with infrastructure, it allows you to fit that curve a lot better on the price performance side of things. So we'll get into a little demo of infrastructure in a little bit. Earlier today, Nadja and AJ introduced health maps. We're going to cover just a little bit more about health maps as it relates directly to New Relic infrastructure. One of the things about the development of this feature that was really fun was getting out and meeting customers who we thought might have a good affinity with it. We actually came across a couple of customers who had built out something similar to this based on New Relic's data and APIs. They built out their own sort of dashboard view that was essentially health map. And when we were able to show them that we were working on it, they got really excited that they weren't going to have to maintain that anymore. But it was great validation for us that it was actually it was a need that was so important that people are actually spending the time to build out their own tooling for that. So we're introducing health maps. I'm going to hand it over to Alberto for a few more announcements.
Sure. Thank you, Craig. Before I get into the announcements, and Bruno is always telling me, publicize where you're from, publicize where you're from. So I'm from Barcelona. I'm sitting in the Barcelona office. We have an office in Barcelona, which is purely a development center. We have 25 engineers. We're growing. We have like 14 openings today. And the reason why I mention is because a good part of what we are building today on New Relic infrastructure is made from Barcelona. And the reason why Bruno asked me to publicize this is because I don't know why, but since we have an office in Barcelona, we keep on having visits from sales guys on Friday evening. And we see them again on Monday morning. So it's like, all right. So they always ask us, hey, can you host customer meetings in the office? Of course we can. So feel free to ask your sales rep to come. We're happy to host you and to show you the Barcelona office anytime. So with that, as I said, one of the things that we specialize in Barcelona is on cloud integrations and integrations in general, as well as we are a center of excellence in UI. And in terms of cloud integrations, one of the things that we've done since launch in FutureStack 2017 has been building AWS integrations. We've been continuously releasing. And we've done so far RDS, we've done Lambda, we've done CloudFront, we've done a bunch of them And we have hundreds of customers leveraging those integrations every day to get data in from AWS and leverage this data together with all the sources of data that you have in the New Relic platform to just figure out what's wrong, what's right, where we can adjust our systems to get it working better. So with that, this same core, we have started working on more cloud integrations and in more clouds. And we take that as a very strategic initiative at New Relic. And we therefore start working on Azure integrations and Google Cloud integrations, but without stopping the advance that we have in AWS that we consider very, very strategic for us. And with that, with no further ado, I would like to introduce you 5 more integrations that we are GAing today, and that every customer from infrastructure can take advantage of. And those are billing and cost control, Kinesis Firehose, Elasticsearch, Route 53, and ECS, which is the EC2 container registry and the ECS container service. So let me tell you a little bit more about those integrations. So for the billing and cost control one, we hear most of the time from our customers that running the cloud is great. It helps us move much faster. It's a managed service, so we don't need to care about where the infrastructure is running, what the performance of it is. Well, that we care. And but sometimes it's easy for us to get costs out of control, right? So one of the things that we wanted to put together in that integration is a mean for a customer to just take control when they scale up in terms of AWS accounts, in terms of New Relic accounts, to take control of what's the cost, where the money is flowing, and just, as Lee Atkinson said, cost is just another performance metric. So we wanted to keep track of this one and make our teams aware of the cost. So the Kinesis Firehose one, that one really is about seeing how data is flowing in to your system and how data is flowing out into your different AWS endpoints, like S3, Redshift, or Elasticsearch. And there's a lot of workflows where we see Kinesis being leveraged today. And then Elasticsearch. So Elasticsearch is really a very, very common used service in AWS. We see that in many use cases like ELK, EKK, and that have been heavily managed by our customers to allow them to monitor those workflows. The Route 53 one, DNS is not very sexy, but the Route 53 one kind of allows you to keep track on the health checks that you have in your DNS zones. And you can keep track as well of key metrics like the SSL handshake time and the time to first byte, which is always great. And in terms of ECS and ECR integrations, we know that running containers is hard. So that's why 32% of the containers are being run by managed service in the cloud today. And one of the things that we wanted to do with the ECS integration is just make the visibility and feed in that visibility that AWS have in the container service into New Relic, so you can manage both how your clusters are performing. So if you need to spin new EC2 instances to your cluster, you can do it, and see exactly how your microservices and services are running into those containers. Good. We'll see a little bit of a demo afterwards to see a couple of those integrations just working. But again, for those customers who want to start a free trial today on infrastructure, or who are customers of infrastructure, like hundreds of customers that we have, you can leverage this one today. All right, so talking about integrations, one of the smart moves I think that we've done last quarter is just set up a team based in Barcelona as well that is going to take full responsibility on developing and maintaining out-of-the-box integrations for services, for software pieces like you guys see here, like MySQL, Nginx, and Cassandra. So this is the first batch that we're going to release in beta, just in a couple of weeks' time. Again, this team is based in Barcelona, and this team is leveraging our New Relic infrastructure SDK to build those integrations. So as we like to say, we eat our own food, so we make it better and better and better and better. We are Spaniards, so we take food very seriously. and those integrations are going to be part of the first batch of a lot of integrations that we're planning to release over the year. Good, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to Greg, so talk a little bit more about the SDK.
Let's watch that.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. So the on-host integrations that Alberto was just talking about, they were all developed using the New Relic Infrastructure SDK, which we're also releasing and generally available today. And it's intended, we'll go through a demo, but it's intended to provide exactly the same kind of functionality that comes out of the box in terms of being able to supply metrics, highly dimensional metrics that you expect from the product, operational events, so that, and we'll show you what that means in the UI, and then inventory, so that you can get that same product experience for any component in your system that you want to be gathering metrics about. If we don't provide it out of the box already, you can go off and develop that. If you're partnering and you've got some components you want to be monitoring, again, it's a really great way to get in there. So we'll show that as a demo in a little bit. So with that, last bit of updates. You heard about the host nut reporting and the process alerting earlier in the keynote. We've also added, since launch of the product, static IP addresses for, so you can set up your firewall rules for connecting to us, and then custom certificate authorities, just in case you have those inside your CA chain. So with that, I'm going to switch to demos. And let's see if we can get this up. Awesome. All right, so earlier today you saw health map. Nadia demoed the health map, and I'm not going to go through the same thing, but I wanted to show you, here we're looking at a very application microservice-oriented view where each one of the cards is oriented that way. There's one more view that I wanted to show you, which is filter sets and related hosts. So filter sets are a concept we introduced with infrastructure that allow you to do essentially metadata-driven collections of stuff, hosts in this case. And in this case, what you're seeing, each one of the cards is one of the filter sets. So you can see, say, the time slice DBs in production, that there are 101 hosts there. One of those is alerting, and you can see that at scale. Same kind of principles. I'm not going to go too far into that. But this is a wonderful way to see what's going on in your system overall. And it drives a lot of configurability and control so that individual teams and folks can see the collections of hosts in the ways that make sense to them, not only for the application and microservice view, which you saw in the previous page, but through whatever lens you want to have. Since not all of your infrastructure is running applications, they're running databases and caches and that sort of thing. So I'm going to use this to jump into, we see this one alerting host on the time slice DBs. I'm going to use that to jump into the New Relic Infrastructure product. And what it's done is it's taken us down to that particular host, that was alerting, and it shows us several things. It shows us a set of events that have happened over time. It shows us sort of core metrics that you'd expect at the host level, whether that's CPU broken out in several different useful ways, and load and memory. And so a lot of the essential metrics that you want to see there. And then you can go in here and see, we're at 60 minutes. It's been alerting for longer than that. I'm going to just pick one of these sections where we had one of the alerts. And you can see the operational events that show up here. So the operational events are things like configuration changes and deployments, and in this case, alerts on that particular service. You can get in and see the timeline of those in more detail. In this case, drive off into alerts and see that. So that's one aspect of the infrastructure product. Another one is inventory, and we talked about that a little while ago. And I just want to get in here and show you sort of the basics. We'll show you this a few different times, but basically you can get in and see what's going on for this particular host, what packages are installed, what are the configurations of those packages. When you have multiple hosts selected, you can actually see sort of the different patterns that are showing up. So with that, I'll hand it off to Alberto to show off some of the integrations.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, so here we go. Yeah, so that's kind of the homepage for infrastructure. So the way to access the integrations, just for those who are not familiar with infrastructure, is just going through the integrations tab here. In the integrations tab, just to mention, you can configure as many AWS accounts as you want. So there's no limit for it. You can set up, we have customers leveraging 48 AWS accounts, which are master accounts, and then they have child accounts. So it can become quite crazy there. But in order to enable one of those integrations that we just released today, or any integration that we have, you just click on Manage Service when you have the account set up. You just can point and click on the integration. So it's really a point and click setup theme for just introducing a new and just getting connected to a new source of data of any AWS cloud service that you use. So we are leveraging more than 20 services today from AWS. And for any service, we just create a default dashboard that you can access by just clicking here. You can set alerts on, and you can watch how what's the nature of the data that we are receiving. So we're just getting the data, we're just getting the metrics. We enrich the metrics with all the AWS metadata that you have in your account, and we just feed it on into the New Relic platform so it's accessible for you. So let me just show you one of the new integrations that we just released, which is the containers service. So as I mentioned, just manage containers on the wild. It's not easy, especially if you have tons of services powering your application. Then if you have tons of applications, kind of the equation just grows. So one of the things that we wanted to do here is, number one, for you to be able to watch how your clusters are working. So if you need to spin up new instances, add more capacity to your clusters, you can just see how your utilization versus reservation is doing in terms of memory and CPU, as well as keeping an eye on how your services are working, right, in terms of CPU and memory. So if any of your microservices or services is going out of control, you just can kill it and just replace it. One of the key parts as well, as Greg mentioned, is that we keep track on every event happening in this specific integration, and we put it in a timeline so it's easier for you to digest. So if there's any change or there's any spike and that is causing an issue, you can go to very fast to the events track and see if there was any change that has caused that spike, as well as keeping track with inventory of the registry of containers that you have right there, together with the configuration of those, which kind of allows you to see which containers are active, which are not, and which ones have been replaced by which ones. All right, that's in terms of the container service of AWS. Let me just show you real quick one dashboard that I put together leveraging the billing integration that we did. So the billing integration is basically putting together two sources of data into the New Relic platform. So first of all, we grab all the financial data that you have in your budget. So there's the AWS budget that you can use to just control what's your actual spend on a specific or many AWS services. You can put a limit on it, and AWS will automatically forecast what's the cost that you're going to incur using this budget, right? So we just can check exactly what's the actual amount that you're spending, which is the limit that you set up for this budget, and what's the forecasted cost. So that is 10 times, 1.1 times 11 times what you forecasted at the beginning or what you budgeted in the beginning. So there's an issue here. So that helps you keep track of, number one, actual spend, number two, forecast. The second source of data that we get from financials on AWS are based on the service themselves. So based on the service APIs, we're able to retrieve all the financial data, feeding into the New Relic platform, and get nice breakdowns on costs like this, where you can see the actual spend that we're having in EC2, S3, data transfer, as well as having a breakdown of all your accounts in AWS in terms of cost. So that together with like EC2 credit, EC2 credit balance, and kind of you can configure, as this is Insight, you can configure your own dashboard. It kind of helps you keep track on the cost that you're incurring. So if any of those accounts are spiking, I've just set up, leveraging the magic of Insight, I've just set up an interaction that I just click on it, and I just go to a dashboard that really breaks down this specific account into the services. So I just check how those services are being used in this account and what's the breakdown in cost. And I can just click on another account and see what's the split in cost for this account. That account looks to be like a database management account. So I can just keep on going like this. So if there's any account that spikes, I can just go, point and click, and break down the cost for this account. So with that, let me just show you real quick an example of MySQL integration for the on-host integrations that we built. So first of all, let me show you how complex the MySQL integration is really. So in the MySQL integration, we've got up to 477 configuration parameters in our inventory. That means that if any of those parameters, for some reason, change, and one of your databases start drifting in terms of configuration, you just can't keep track of it. You can put alerts on it, you can keep track on it. So that's really important just to see if there's any database that you're having like failed to patch or whatever, for whatever reason, it's just drifting in terms of configuration and causing issues. So that's in terms of inventory. In terms of metrics, we're capturing more than 100 metrics from MySQL. We just put a dashboard here together that kind of shows you the most relevant metrics. But again, when you're buying the New Relic infrastructure, you're entitled to use for New Relic infrastructure insights. And that allows you to put together nice dashboards that will help your team just discover how things are going. So in this case, we just put together like MySQL write and read operations, the queries executed, the maximum number of concurrent queries in connections to a database in one day, byte sent versus byte received, and so on and so forth. So yeah, hope that's a good sneak peek of what we are going to release in a couple of weeks for the MySQL, Cassandra, and Nginx integration. And with that, since we are just leveraging our super powerful SDK to do those integrations, I hand it over to Greg so he can show you a little bit how that works.
Sure, thank you. So the SDK itself, I want to show you the outcomes of a custom integration put together for this demonstration. And so what you're looking at here is the events for the last hour coming from that custom integration plugin. And you can see that it's saying, the agent cache size is larger than some threshold. And so the integration we did was sort of meta. It basically looks at there's a file system cache that the agent uses. It looks at the size of that and reports the size on a heartbeat, and then reports up some inventory information. And then if it happens that the cache size, the actual, in practice, is larger than some configured threshold, it creates these operational events. So the operational events show up here. And I'll show you the code here in a minute for what generated all of this. There is a custom event for insights that's generated by the integration, and we can see that here. Let me rerun this query so that it's updated. So we can see that we're getting 4 samples a minute, basically, so it's happening every 15 seconds. And if we go in and tweak this, I'm going to dare to type during a demo. Average of the cache directory size. We should see that should be stable because I hard-coded it for the sake of the demo. So you can essentially build up your own dashboards and run your own queries and against any of the kind of data that you want to collect. And the way that you collect that data is you basically have a script that you set up for the agent to call out to. And the on-host agent for New Relic infrastructure, you configure it and say, hey, there's this integration, there's this script I want you to run. And the script runs and spits out basically a JSON payload with the information. So I just ran that script here so you could see what that looks like. Some basic metadata information around which plugin it is. And then you can see the metrics, the inventory, and the events that were coming out of it at that point. The way that this is generated, just getting into the actual code for that script, it's pretty straightforward. There's some type declarations for those different kinds of data. There's a plugin data structure that essentially looks a lot like the JSON, except in Go, in this case. You can use any programming language that you want. It gives you the full power of all of the capabilities and the types of data that New Relic infrastructure can collect, but for whatever component you want to do. There's a bit of marshalling code for JSON. We'll jump out of that. And then you can see the main method here. It basically reads some parameters. Those parameters can come from the command line. They can come from a config file I'll show you here in a moment. So it goes in, initializes that, and then collects the data that it wants to. In this case, collects the directory size in bytes. And like I said, it's hard-coded for the sake of the demo. There's a threshold with a default, and you can override it through config. The metric data itself is recorded every time. So you just go in and you add that metric to the list of metrics you want to report through the integration. And then this script happens to check the logic of, is that directory size larger than the threshold that's configured? If so, add an operational event, and then set the rest of the values and ship that off via that JSON payload to the agent. Now, the agent itself needs to know that it exists, and so you set up a definition file. It's pretty straightforward. Again, some just basic information about it. And you control what interval it's polling on. In this case, we saw it's 15 seconds. What is the command that's being run? And then you can configure. There's a separate config file for the script itself. So you can tell it, in this case, you can see where the threshold of 2,000 is coming from. You can go in and reset that and have a different threshold very easily per deployment of the integration. One last thing I want to show you is how this shows up in inventory. So let me get back into the browser. And if we go in here, that script is called, or plugin is called InfraLab. And so I'll search, and on the host that's running the agent, you can see here, it sees the plugin itself as inventory, and you can actually go in and see how it's being used and what the configuration is. Very straightforward. So it's a very nice ecosystem. The plugin's really well integrated into the product and gives you essentially full power over all of that. So with that, that wraps up the set of demos that we have. If we switch back to the slides, please. Thank you. We'll just wrap up with the call to action, which is check it out if you haven't already. Check it. It's really awesome, really straightforward to deploy, and within moments of deploying the agent, you'll start to see and be able to play with some of what we've demoed today. Turn on the cloud integrations and enjoy. So thank you very much.
Thank you.